whoever's watching, are you able to hear me? You can put in the comments if you can, or if you can't. All right, so I guess we can get started. I hope everyone can hear me. So hi everyone, my name is Ellen and I'm a first year medical student at the University of Ottawa. I hope you've all had a great day and a good start to your week. So today we're gonna be talking about common sports injuries in kids. So we're gonna go through some common injuries, a general approach to treating sports injuries, and when you should probably take your child to go see a doctor. And we're also going to talk about how to prevent sports injuries. So this is a topic that's really important to me because I played a lot of sports when I was younger, and I also got injured quite a bit. And it was ultimately my injuries that led me to stop playing sports at a competitive level. So this area of health means a lot to me, and I'm telling you all of this not so that you're scared off from participating in sport. The benefits of participating in sports are really boundless, like in all aspects of health and well-being. But rather, I hope that today's live will help all of you and your children participate in sports and physical activity for as long as possible throughout your whole life. So that's the goal for today. You can ask questions in the comments as we go along. I might not be able to respond to them right away, but in the next day or so, I can come back to this video and respond to your questions in the comments. Maybe we'll wait for a few more people to sign on. So maybe we'll wait maybe 2 more minutes and then we can actually get started. Great. We can just keep on going then. And if you're tuning in later, then that's awesome as well. So first, we're just going to go through some common sports injuries in kids. And, to make things logical, we're going to go from head to toe. So starting at the head, probably the most important head injury to talk about is concussion. So a concussion happens when your child experiences some sort of blow or force to the head that causes their brain to move quickly back and forth within their skull. And this is possible because our brains are actually floating around in fluid within our skull. So a force that is strong enough can actually cause your brain to move around and then potentially bump into your skull, causing damage. And the brain could also bounce or twist, and sometimes the actual cells of your brain might get stretched and damaged. And it's this damage to your brain that can cause many symptoms that range from physical to cognitive, as well as emotional and sleep related. So if, let's say, your child is playing hockey and they get checked straight into the boards head first. So if they experienced a concussion, they might get a headache, neck pain, nausea or vomiting, light or noise sensitivity, balance problems or dizziness, blurred vision. They might feel confused or have memory loss or just feel slow and sluggish. And they simply just might not feel right. They also might be more sad or emotional or anxious than usual. And they might also have troubles with sleep. So either being drowsy and sleeping way more than usual, or having a lot of trouble falling asleep and sleeping way less than usual. And the tricky thing is these symptoms might not come on right away after a head impact. They might not come on at all. They might come and go. But the important thing with head injuries is, well, there's three things. Make sure they stop playing. They should not go back into the game after getting a head injury. 2, make sure to observe how your child is feeling and what symptoms they are experiencing in the hours and days after the injury. And 3, make sure to book an appointment with the physician as soon as possible, ideally within the first 24 to 48 hours after the injury. And we'll talk a little bit more later in this live about how to go about treatment and such with regards to concussions. So now moving on to the rest of the body, another common injury that you can get pretty much anywhere is a muscle strain or a pulled muscle. And a less severe pulled muscle might just be like an overstretching of the muscle, and a more severe injury might involve a tear in the muscle. But basically, any sort of pulled muscle might feel painful, tender to the touch. It might actually look a bit red or bruised or swollen, depending on how bad it is. And your child's range of motion might also be limited. And we'll talk a bit more again about how to treat muscle strains and how to prevent them a bit later in the live. So the next thing I want to talk about are shin splints. It's a super common injury, especially for runners and dancers. And this is pain along your child's shin bone or their tibia. So I'll show you on my leg right here. So shin splints, you can get pain all around here at the front of their shin bone, basically. And it's more likely to happen if your child has recently started a much more intense training plan, or if they've recently changed their training plan. So this extra impact on their shins can cause pain over time. And if your child doesn't rest enough from high impact activities, then the pain may progress and get worse, and possibly the bone could actually break. So shin splints, in terms of symptoms, they're pretty non-specific, but they would generally be tenderness, soreness, any sort of pain along the shin bone, and possibly some swelling in that area as well. And lastly, we're going to talk about sprained ankles. This is an injury that is also commonly called a rolled ankle because when you roll or twist or turn your ankle in a weird way while you're putting weight on it, it can cause damage to the tissues that are holding your ankle bones together. And again, with any of these injuries, this can happen to different extents and different levels of severity. But in general, if your child has sprained their ankle, they might complain of ankle pain, tenderness, swelling. There might be bruising and limited range of motion, and possibly some instability. So before we move on, does anyone have any questions? You can write in the chat or in the comments if you'd like. Great, well, we can just keep on moving on then. So we've talked about some 4 common injuries. Of course, you know, there's a bajillion different ways to get injured, but we just don't have time to cover that. But I'm going to go over some general approaches to treating sports injuries. And I'm also going to talk about when it's really important to see a doctor, and when you probably should not treat things at home. So this comes with the caveat that I'm not a physician, I'm a student. So I'm going to give a general framework for how to take care of your child if they've been injured. But the overarching message here is if your child really isn't feeling well, if they're in a lot of pain, please go to the doctor and get the injury checked out. So more specifically, if they don't seem to be getting better after a few days of rest, if it's getting in the way of the way they're playing their sport or how they're going through their daily life, if the body part that they've injured feels unstable, or if a joint is locking, or if it's stiff, if there's any numbness, weakness, or tingling in addition to the pain, if they're showing any of these symptoms, or you just really aren't sure if an injury is minor or something more serious, I recommend just going to a medical professional to go get their injury checked out. So with that being said, let's talk a bit more about specifics. So again, going from head to toe, we talked about concussions earlier and the example of, you know, your child who was checked into the boards and now they have all of these symptoms. The bottom line is, and the biggest takeaway, is that treating concussions is not something that you and your family and your child should do alone. It's scary. It's a complicated injury with a complicated recovery process. So the best advice I can give you is to see a doctor as soon as possible if you suspect that your child has experienced a concussion. And in the interim, just make sure they get a lot of rest, a good night's sleep if possible, reduce screen time, loud music, anything else that will make their symptoms worse. There's also some red flags to look out for, and if you notice any of these symptoms, it would be a good idea to go to Emerge. So if your child is vomiting repeatedly, if it's hard to wake them up, if they're losing consciousness, if they have a worsening headache, if they're weak or dizzy or numb in certain places, if they have like a major behavior change, they can't walk straight, if anything seems to be going wrong, then go to the emergency room because it definitely could be a medical emergency. And that's a long list of symptoms to remember, but you don't have to remember them because there are a lot of good resources from hospitals and healthcare providers that you can access online. I can put some of them in the comments later. But you know, you as a parent know your child best. And if they're exhibiting signs and symptoms that you feel like are concerning, then you know where to go, and that's Emerge. So moral of the story when it comes to head injuries and concussions is just seek medical attention. But the other injuries that we spoke about earlier, like pulled muscles, shin splints, rolled ankles, they can all be managed, at least initially, with the same general approach. So as I mentioned before, if your child is experiencing any of the more concerning symptoms, like numbness, extreme pain, pain that isn't getting better, their joint feels unstable or stiff, etc., this approach won't really cut it, and I'd highly recommend going to see a physician. With that being said, has anyone heard of the acronym RICE with regards to sports injuries? If you have, you can comment. Maybe say what some of the letters mean. And if not, that's okay. I'll go through it. Okay, so RICE stands for rest, ice, compression, and elevation. And it's a handy acronym to remember when you're dealing with injuries. And it's one that's traditionally taught. But what I wanted to share with you today is a slight modification to that approach called PRICE. So it's just PRICE. So the RICE part remains the same, just rest, ice, compression, and elevation, and I'll go through what all of those mean. But the extra P stands for protection, and we'll start there. So protection just means that you should protect the injured area from getting injured even more. And that makes sense. And this can look like using crutches if one of your ankles is injured. This might look like immobilizing the injured area with a splint or a brace for your child. But basically, the ultimate goal here is to prevent your child from getting even more injured. So P was for protection. And next, R stands for rest. And when we talk about rest, we don't really mean that, if your child gets shin splints, you have to get them to completely stop exercising and stop walking, and they have to stay in bed all day. Because that's not healthy, and it's also not necessary. And in some cases, with some injuries, it actually might make recovery a bit harder. So the R of this acronym would be more accurately described as relative rest. So your child should still be moving and it should be active, maybe less so than before, and certainly they should be using the injured part of their body less. So while you should ask them to avoid any movements that make their injury feel more painful or less stable, we know that gentle movements that maintain your range of motion can actually support your recovery. So for example, if you've rolled your ankle, or if your child has rolled their ankle and you think that they've sprained it, definitely make sure that they take some time off as needed from running on it. But some gentle stretching, just flexing their ankle like back and forth, will help reduce swelling. It'll help preserve range of motion, and ultimately will be beneficial to their recovery. So we went through P for protect, R for rest, or relative rest. And next is I, which stands for ice, which is recommended to reduce, again, swelling and pain. So you don't necessarily need to go buy a proper ice pack, like just a plastic bag filled with some crushed ice, or even a bag of frozen peas or frozen corn wrapped up in a towel. That will be sufficient. And I've actually been told by physiotherapists before that a bag of peas or corn actually works really well because it's able to mold to the injured part of your body quite well. So yes, you don't need to go buy an ice pack. You can just use what you have. So in terms of how long you should ice, you shouldn't keep the ice on for hours and hours at a time because this could be quite dangerous and possibly not even really effective. So a common recommendation when it comes to icing is just a cycle of 10 to 15 minutes of icing, followed by 1 to 2 hours without icing, and then just cycling back and forth. So we went through protection, relative rest, and ice. So now the C in PRICE stands for compression. And you can do this with elastic bandages. So I don't have any with me right now, but you can get these at any drugstore. And they're just like a roll of like beige stretchy fabric that you can wrap around an injured joint like a wrist or an ankle. And this will help reduce swelling, provide some support, help with recovery. And in terms of how tight you should wrap the injured area, try to go for a medium amount of tension. You know, if it's too loose, then it won't really do anything. And if it's too tight, then, and certainly if it causes any sort of numbness or tingling or makes your child's skin turn a different color, then that's too tight and that could be quite dangerous. And generally speaking, you should remove the wrappings before bed. So we've gone through protection, relative rest, ice, and compression. And lastly, the E stands for elevation. So elevating the injured area reduces how much blood can get to that area. And just by virtue of gravity, this will help reduce swelling. So, for example, if you've injured or if your child has injured their ankle, ideally you would have a setup so that their ankle is propped up and above the level of their heart. And this will prevent blood from pooling at their ankle. And again, it will help reduce swelling. So you'll notice a lot of the components of PRICE, protection, relative rest, ice, compression, and elevation. They all focus on reducing swelling because this helps to decrease pain and preserve your child's range of motion, which is super important. So, before we move on to how to prevent injuries from happening at all, does anyone have any questions? Anything to add in the comments? All right, so now we can move on to how we can prevent injuries. So just before we get there, I just want to quickly recap what we talked about when we talked about treating injuries. So our two main takeaways were to see a doctor right away if you have a head injury or if your child sustains a head injury, and then the PRICE method for less severe muscle-related injuries. Oh, thanks, Danielle. Glad you're appreciating it. But yes, so now we're going to talk about injury prevention because there are a lot of things that you and your child can do to prevent injuries from even happening in the first place, which, you know, is the ideal scenario. So before I move on and I talk about some suggestions that I have for how to prevent injuries, I was wondering if anyone else who's watching wants to share anything that they or their child might be doing to prevent injury. It's a very broad question, but I'd love to hear what all of you do to make sure that you stay safe when you're playing sports. So I'll wait maybe 10-15 seconds to see. Yes, stretching before exercising, very, very good point. I'm actually going to talk about that soon. So you've read my mind. While people keep on commenting. But yeah, so stretching before exercising, really good point. But even before we get there, wearing the right protective equipment is also super, super important. So it might seem obvious, but you know, like if a sport requires that you have a helmet on, you have wrist guards, knee and elbow pads, mouth guards, you should make sure that your child has all of that equipment and is wearing it properly, even during practice, because injuries can happen regardless. Yes, definitely wearing proper shoes. So for example, you know, if they're playing soccer or football or rugby, they should be wearing cleats so that they aren't slipping all over the place on the field. And you know, even if you're playing hockey or you're running track and field, you want to make sure that your skates and your running shoes fit properly, because if they're too small or too big, then that can also potentially cause some sort of injury. Thank you so much for all these great suggestions, Danielle. Super appreciate it. And yeah, so just make sure that you're not only using the right equipment, but also making sure that it's in good condition, it fits your child properly. For example, with the shoes, too big or too small, you're gonna predispose yourself to injury. And as well, like a helmet that's too big or too small is not going to protect your child properly. So really do make sure that your child not only has the right equipment and the right protection, but that it also fits. The next tip is just a general life tip, but staying hydrated and making sure that your child is getting enough sleep, especially before big games or even just a practice, that is very, very important. You know, if your child is not feeling well, like physically, and they're sleep deprived, then their body's not really gonna work in the way that they're used to, and this can kind of predispose them to injury. So just general, you know, wellness, staying hydrated, getting enough sleep, eating enough, all of that is very, very actually quite important to injury prevention. And then the next chunk of things that I want to talk about are alluding to what Danielle said earlier with stretching before exercising. So there is a little bit of, you know, conversations happening between various exercise scientists kind of talking about whether or not stretching before exercising really helps to prevent injury. And I think the current consensus right now is that static stretching, so stretching maybe like this and just holding this pose for like 30 seconds and stretching out your triceps on like cold muscles when you haven't warmed up yet, isn't super beneficial to injury prevention. And the most beneficial thing would be dynamic stretching and dynamic warm-ups. So like stretching out your muscles and also getting them warm and ready and moving at the same time. So I thought I would get up and demonstrate some dynamic warm-ups, and I would hope that those of you who are watching would do this with me, because otherwise it will just be me all alone doing this and I'd feel kind of silly. But I'll just do some dynamic warm-ups that really help to not only like get your heart pumping a little bit, get your muscles and joints nice and loose and warm. And all of this is really going to help get your child's body ready for the game or the practice or the workout, and that will ultimately help reduce injuries. So I'm just going to get up, and hopefully this is a good view where you can see me. Or actually, maybe I'll move. maybe we can move here and you might be able to see what I'm doing better. But this is a warm-up that I used to do all the time when I used to play soccer. So, ideally you would be in a slightly larger space than I am in right now, but that's okay. So, first you can just run back and forth a couple times. You can just jog like so. Jogging is just a great simple way to get your heart rate up and your legs moving. So you might jog a couple lengths of the field. And then we can go in and do some high knees. So I'm not sure if everyone knows what high knees are, but basically you're just gonna run and try and get your knees as high as possible. And this is very helpful. It kind of stretches out some parts of your legs while also keeping your heart rate up and keeping your muscles warm. So I will demonstrate how to do these like this. Just get your knees right up. Move that away, like so. And we can go a couple lengths. And then we can kind of do the opposite. And we can do bum kicks. So instead of having your knees up, you would just try to kick your bum with your feet. And I'm not sure if you can see that on the live, but I'll just go ahead and do it anyways. Like so. And again, that just stretches out your quad muscles at the front of your legs. And again, just keeps your heart rate up, and it's a good way to dynamically warm up. And then, this is something that I used to do a lot as a soccer player, where your hip muscles and your leg muscles and your groin muscles are often quite injury prone. So I'm not sure what the exercise is called, but essentially you're kind of skipping and also like opening up and rotating your hip outwards. So it would look something like this. Not sure if you can see that. Let me try and get in view again. So you could do that a couple times and then do the opposite. So if before we were rotating our hips out, now we would rotate our hips in and then skip. And then we can do the other length of the way back. Oops. Okay, so that's a very quick dynamic warm-up. I am in my living room where there's very limited space, so that's a bit shorter than what a dynamic warm-up should be. But the idea is you're getting your body moving, you're getting your muscles nice and warm, and you're getting your heart rate up. And all of that is going to help ease your body into a harder workout or a game or a practice. So maybe I'll stay here actually, because now would actually be a good time to, as Danielle suggested, get started with stretching, because now your muscles are nice and warm and they're loose, and they're more amenable to the benefits of stretching. So you can do something like a triceps pull. So you can take your right arm, put it across your chest, and have your left hand support. And when it comes to stretching, ideally you would hold the stretch for like 30 to 60 seconds. For time's sake, I'm not going to do that today, but yeah, that's generally the accepted amount of time to get the full benefits of a stretch, and then we can switch. Yeah, stretching is super beneficial. Again, it helps prevent injury, it helps get your muscles nice and loose so that when you're out on the field or on the rink, your muscles aren't like shocked by the amount of work that they suddenly have to do and then they get torn. And when it comes to stretching, you don't want to push yourself to the point of pain. You just want to feel some tension in whatever muscle you're stretching, and then you can stop there. There's no point in going to the point of pain. So we can stretch our arms statically like that. We can also do arm circles. This gets a really nice stretch and range of motion throughout your arms and your shoulder. We can go the other way around. It just feels very good too. And then we can move on to the legs. So to stretch your quads or your quadricep muscles, which are at the front of your thighs, you can stand on one leg and then just pull your leg up like so, kind of like how we were doing before with the bum kicks, but now you're just kind of holding it in position, and then just stand here, and you should feel some sort of stretch at the front of your legs where your hamstrings are. It's also a good balancing exercise. You can repeat it on the other leg like so. Of course, you would want to hold these stretches a little bit longer than I'm doing, but I think we're a little bit short on time. We still have stuff to go through. And then I'll just show you a couple more stretches. So if you want to stretch your hamstrings, you can just do a classic touching your toes. So I'm not sure if you'll be able to see from this angle, but you can just bend over and try and reach for the ground while keeping your legs straight, because if you bend them, then you won't get as good of a stretch. And you can just hang out there for 30 to 60 seconds. And there's so many more stretches that you can do. It really is infinite. And just make sure that regardless of whatever kind of, here, I'll go back to where I was before. Regardless of whatever kind of workout you are doing, and what sport you're doing, you really should be stretching your whole body, just to really make sure that you are preventing injury in your whole body. So you've warmed up, you've stretched, you've made sure that you're hydrated the night before, you got enough sleep, you're wearing all the right protective equipment for the sport that you're playing, and then you play the game. And you didn't get hurt because you did everything right, which is great. And now is the end of the game. And it's actually important to do stuff after you finish playing your game or after you finish your practice to prevent injury and to prevent soreness from coming on. So you can basically do a cool down. And the nice thing about a cool down, and why I'm sitting here doing it and not up there demonstrating again, is that you can pretty much do the same things that you did to warm up. You could do a nice, gentle jog. You can, follow up with gentle stretching, and that will just help prevent your muscles from getting stiff and really sore, and will ultimately also help in reducing injury and pain. So yes, I hope that was helpful. Just a few other notes about preventing injury. So you might think about most injuries as like a one-time, like freak accident sort of situation where, part of your body or your child's body is put under, too much stress all at once, and then they get injured. But a lot of sports injuries are actually overuse injuries. So they're caused by the gradual accumulation of damage to their tissues that just results from repetitive trauma to that part of the body. So shin splints, how we spoke about before, especially if you're a runner or a dancer, it's something that you're quite at risk for. That's a good example of an overuse injury, because it's that repeated high impact over time that can slowly cause damage to your shin bones, your tibia, and then eventually cause quite a bit of pain. So one way to prevent overuse injuries is to get your child involved in several different sports. So we know that multi-sport athletes, so athletes who play more than one sport, they actually have lower rates of injury. And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? Because they're moving their bodies in different ways when they're playing different sports, and they're putting less repeated stress on the same parts of their bodies day after day. So that's one thing to consider. Another way to protect yourself and your children from injury is being diligent about conditioning and working out outside of the games and outside of practice. You're more likely to get injured when you're tired, when your body's tired. So working on your endurance, both from like a cardiovascular, like heart perspective, as well as from a strength and a muscle perspective, that's very important, okay? And as well, especially for joint injuries, by having strong muscles surrounding your joints, you can actually provide stability to that joint and reduce the likelihood that joint will get injured. So for example, if your child has had like a knee injury before, or if they're playing a sport that's known to have quite a bit of knee injuries, then a really good idea would be to strengthen the muscles around their hips, the muscles around their glutes, all the muscles in their thighs, so their hamstrings and their quads. Because by being surrounded by strong muscle, that's going to protect their knees. Okay, so just making sure that you're working on your strength and endurance outside of your practices and games, or on the court or the field or the track, that's hugely important. Okay, so does anyone have any questions about that? We've been through a lot of information in the past 40-ish minutes, so I just want to make sure that everyone is good with what we've talked about. All right, so I'll keep talking, and again, if you have any questions, you can just pop them in the comments, and I'll come back to this live after and I'll respond to them. But I just quickly want to touch on how to make conditioning fun. I think this is a really important consideration because your child is going to be much more likely to stick to regular conditioning sessions, and they're going to be more likely to exercise if they enjoy it, right? So before I share some of my tips, does anyone have any ideas on how to make conditioning fun? You can put it in the comments. Oh, thanks, Danielle. So I'll just go ahead and share some of my tips. And if you want, you can share some of your tips too on how to make conditioning fun while I'm talking about mine. But for me, one of the biggest motivators for exercising and exercising with others, oh my gosh, sorry, let's rewind. One of the biggest motivators for me for exercising, yes, add music. Thanks, Joe. But yes, what I was gonna say is one of the biggest motivators for me when exercising is just exercising with others, exercising with my friends, exercising with my family. It's just so much more fun. It turns into like a social event, especially if you're super competitive like me. I go so much harder in my workouts when everyone around me is going just as hard. So obviously COVID limits, who you're able to work out with, especially like you might not be able to work out with your friends or your teammates in person, but you can always work out with them over Zoom or over FaceTime. You can always work out with your family and whoever's in your household as well. And it's such a wonderful opportunity for quality family time while also benefiting, your collective fitness and well-being. And you also don't need to go to a gym to work out. There are thousands of videos available on YouTube that will guide you through different workouts right at home. And often these videos won't require much equipment or any equipment at all. So that's my first tip. Exercising with others, it will always make things way more fun. And yes, Joe, we are on the same page with my next tip here, because my next tip was to add good music. I have a workout playlist with really fun, like fast-paced, pump-up songs, and I'm a firm believer that a good playlist makes every workout better. And going along with my previous tip, if you're going to be working out with others, a really fun thing to do is making a collaborative playlist that you can all add songs to and then work out to together. It's a lot of fun. And another thing to consider is that, conditioning and working out doesn't always have to look like just doing strength training. And I think switching up the sorts of activities that you and your child do for conditioning is super beneficial in keeping things fun and exciting. So, an activity like hiking could prove to be a fantastic opportunity for conditioning, especially if you're in the Outaouais Gatineau area. I believe there's hiking year-round at Gatineau Park and some other parks in the area. And even if it doesn't seem like working out, hiking actually builds strength and endurance, and on top of that, you're spending time outside in nature. It's always a good thing. So I'd really recommend thinking outside of the box when you're thinking of ways to keep conditioning fun for you and your children. And lastly, I'm just a big fan, working on breathing exercises. That's a really good point, Joe. Yeah, I think working on breathing exercises, it transcends sport, right? Learning how to breathe properly and breathing deeply is super important for your mental health and helping with stress and anxiety as well. And it can be a wonderful mindfulness exercise too. So thanks for sharing. Absolutely. But the last tip that I wanted to share as well is just make sure that, as a parent, you're really putting in a lot of effort to make conditioning feel like fun and feel like a game rather than a chore. All of the things that I've already mentioned, like working out with others, playing fun music, looking outside the box, I think they will all really help to make conditioning feel way more fun and enjoyable. But also part of it comes down to your attitude as well as a parent. So if you're super excited and enthusiastic about exercising, and for example, if you frame a family workout as this fun family event, and if you throw in elements of competition, that will not only produce a great workout, but also really great family and social time as well. So really just make sure that as a parent, you're selling it. You're not only making sure that your children know that conditioning is important, but you're also making it clear that it can also be really fun. So that's all I have for today. I'll just do a quick recap of what we talked about, because we talked about a lot. So we talked about concussions, pulled muscles, shin splints, sprained ankles. We talked about the importance of seeing a doctor if your child experiences any head injury, as well as the Price method. So protection, relative rest, ice, compression, and elevation. Oh, thanks, Danielle. I'm glad you appreciate it. And we also talked about how to prevent injury, and from happening in the first place, which is the ultimate goal. And you can do this through using proper equipment, warm up and stretching, and cool downs. And we also talked about the importance of conditioning and how to make it fun for the whole family, because it really is fun. So yeah, with that being said, I think my time is super up. Does anyone have any questions for me? I'll stay on for the next couple minutes, and then you can always pop some questions in the comments, and then I'll come back in the next couple days and try to answer them as best as I can. just wanted to thank all of you for coming out on a Tuesday evening to listen and to learn. This has been so much fun. And yeah, I'll be back in a couple weeks so we can learn some more stuff together. And yeah, for the next couple months or so, oh, thanks, Joe. That's so sweet. And for the next couple months or so, my colleagues and I at the med school will be coming on every evening to chat about many health-related, wellness-related things. So thank you so much for being here. I think I'm gonna sign off if I know how to do that. And yeah, feel free to comment still if you have any questions, and I'll get back to you. Thank you so much. Bye.